when you look back at history, there's so many instances of these broad sweeping statements that are made that influence entire generations and people just taking the advice. And then later on, many of these, statements that were made, no one ever comes back and is like, oh, sorry about that. Actually, that came from nowhere. I just made it up. I just thought it sounded good at the moment. Like, how does this happen? I don't understand.
The brain likes to just be comfortable and lazy with whatever it believes first. Not because it's more logical or scientific than new information, but simply because it heard it first. And subconsciously, you'll be very satisfied with the peace of just having one belief. And if a new idea comes along that threatens that belief, the brain subconsciously will reject or dismiss the new information because it doesn't want conflict. It wants a happy one belief brain.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mission Daily. I'm your host, Stephanie Postles, and I'm wondering, have you ever wondered why there was all of a sudden a whole generation of Americans that struggle with things like peanut allergies? Or why there's been so much misinformation in the world of health that has gotten completely out of hand and not addressed? Well, today we're about to uncover how missteps in medical science and expert recommendations may have shaped some of the biggest health challenges out there. And more importantly, of course, how we're going to fix them. So here to help us navigate all these topics is Dr. Marty Makary. Dr. Makary is a New York Times best-selling author and one of the nation's leading voices in healthcare reform. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins University, an award-winning surgeon, and a pioneer in medical transparency and healthcare redesign. His latest book is called Blind Spots: When Medicine Gets It Wrong and What It Means for Our Health. Dives deep into the blind spots of modern medicine, shedding light on how medical advice can sometimes go tragically wrong and how we can start getting it right. And a little side note, his book just hit number 2 on the Amazon list of best-selling books in America, which is amazing to see interest from the market like this. So with all that, Dr. Makary, welcome to Mission Daily.
Great to be with you, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this world because it's one that I love so much. And I feel like being here in Austin, a lot of these topics we're all talking about. All my friends are biohackers. I have a lot of doctor friends, this world is so fun for me. So that's why I was really excited to get you on the show. So I want to dive first into this peanut allergy thing because I think it's something that kind of went under the radar. And when it came, into my world was actually my mom, who's a teacher of 30 years. And she's like, so weird. All of a sudden, there's just this huge spike and everyone just has allergies and everyone's allergic to peanuts now. And all these kids I have to watch out for. And it's like this one generation that they're all allergic to it. And I'm like, how are more people not talking about this? So I would love to start there, like what happened and why?
Yeah, first of all, you're right. We didn't have peanut allergies anywhere near this magnitude just a generation ago. Most parts of Africa and Europe have 0 peanut allergies in their population. It is really a uniquely American problem. And what happened was 24 years ago, the medical establishment issued a recommendation that was just completely flawed. It was based on an opinion. It was medical dogma. It had no scientific support. And it ended up igniting the modern day peanut allergy epidemic, which was they told mothers to make sure no child is exposed to peanut butter ages 0 through 3. No peanut products, nothing. And they forgot about a basic principle called immune tolerance, or the dirt theory, what parents had been knowing for a long time. And that is when you're exposed to allergens early, your body learns to tolerate them later in life. Mm-hmm. And so as peanut allergies went up in the 2000s, the medical establishment freaked out. We saw a new type of allergy, which is the severe anaphylactic response. People coming to the emergency room unable to breathe because they're close to a peanut. They didn't even eat one. They're just near one. And these are real problems. I mean, this is real. We shouldn't mock it. And they thought, well, we have to double down. We have anti-science parents. We have to get more compliance with our peanut abstinence recommendation. And as they did, things just got worse and worse and worse. So to this day, the United States has the worst peanut allergy problem in the world. And when you get a lot of allergies in the population, then the kids with the allergies will sometimes just avoid peanut products altogether to manage the allergy, which means other kids are not around peanut products. Mm-hmm. So it becomes a self-licking ice cream cone, if you will, a perpetual cycle.
Yeah, it's sad because when you look back at history and when I was browsing through your book, I'm like, there's so many instances of these broad sweeping statements that are made that influence entire generations and people just taking the advice. I mean, I even think about COVID. I'm like, so many statements made, people trying to follow the rules and do what they're told without checking into it. And then later on, many of these, statements that were made, no one ever comes back and is like, oh, sorry about that. Actually, that came from nowhere. I just made it up. I just thought it sounded good at the moment. Like, how does this happen? I don't understand.
Yeah, medicine makes up a lot of stuff. Drink 3 glasses of cow's milk a day. They just made that up. That's still the current recommendation from the government for adults and children. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I mean, where'd that come from? That was really
sponsored by Kellogg's.
Kellogg, 1958 advertising campaign. I mean, I don't think cavemen woke up to a breakfast buffet.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff like that we've made up, and people need to know the truth. And that's why I wrote the book, Blind Spots, because a lot of the medical dogma is still prevalent in the medical profession.
When you were writing your book, what were things that you discovered that actually surprised you, where you're like, how does no one know this yet? I need to tell more people.
Well, probably the most tragic screw up of modern medicine was the demonization of hormone therapy for women who go through menopause, saying that it caused breast cancer. I'd say 80% of doctors to this day still believe it, still deny menopausal women hormone therapy, that is taking estrogen to replace your body's natural estrogen and progesterone. There's probably no medicine in the modern era that has improved the health of a population more than hormone replacement therapy at menopause. Not only does it alleviate the symptoms of menopause, the hot flashes, weight gain, mood swings, night sweats, brain fog, but it has long-term health benefits because it increases nitric oxide, it does something to the nerves, and there's a 35% lower risk of Alzheimer's, 50 to 60% lower risk of cognitive decline. If a woman falls or breaks a bone, she's far less likely to need surgery or even break a bone altogether. The bones are much stronger. It prevents osteoporosis. It reduces heart attacks by 50%. I mean, that's the number one cause of death in women. All of these long-term benefits are incredible. Women live 3.5 years longer on average. They feel better. They perform better. But tragically, this hormone replacement therapy at the time of menopause has been denied to 50 million women because one guy 22 years ago at the NIH declared that it causes breast cancer. When I reached out to him in retirement, showed him his own data, and called him out, he acknowledged to me that his own data did not support that claim. He had misrepresented his data.
Wow.
So it affected my mom. It affected a lot of people we know. It still affects women to this day. It's ongoing. That was what was so shocking about the story is people to this day are still believing this dogma that it increases breast cancer mortality.
Man, it's hard hearing those things. I wonder, like, what is holding back, getting more awareness? Like, your book, amazing, but like, what else is there? What's holding this space back from like talking about like, here's the actual capital T truths right now. Like, here's all the 10 things that you might believe that are actually wrong. I mean, why have we not adjusted the food pyramid? Why do people, they're still scared of egg yolks, and maybe grass-fed butter? Like, why? Like, why have you not, made some bigger statements about like, these things are actually good for you and take what you know and throw it away. That's what I always tell my parents. I'm like, whatever you think you actually still know, no, I can't with what your knowledge is from the 70s and 80s.
Steph, my dad is a doc, and I cannot convince him that natural fats are okay, that you don't have to avoid them. And that's because it was beat into him for 60 years. Mm-hmm. And it's so ingrained in the culture of medicine, a lot of these dogmas. And so that's what we're up against. And that's why a bunch of us docs are now going directly to the public to try to educate people. And if you just tell people what to do, it's a boring textbook read. But if you tell people the backstory of how recommendation got reamed through and they bypassed experts and they saw data to the contrary and suppressed it, then it becomes an exciting story. And then people are more likely to remember it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to talk about gut health, because I was hearing you, and I think you were on Mark Hyman's show, which I love, Mark, talking about the importance of gut health and, how in today's world, so many people throw antibiotics at things and it's ruining gut health, and gut health is tied to so many things. So I want to understand, what are some of these misconceptions that people have today around gut health and the power of, if you heal your gut, probably many things can get healed with it.
Well, new research is showing that the microbiome, or the bacteria that live in this balance in the gut, millions of different bacteria, it's involved in a lot of stuff we didn't appreciate. I go through the latest scientific research on it in the book Blind Spots, but it's involved in digestion. Some of those bacteria produce vitamins. They produce serotonin, involved in mood and brain health, and may have something to do with the mood disorders that we're seeing. Some of those bacteria make GLP-1, the active ingredient in Ozempic, in low doses. It trains the immune system. It's involved in the regulation of estrogen. So there's so many functions that are going on in this garden of bacteria along the GI tract. And when we look at the rise of colon cancer in young, healthy people, it appears as if their microbiome has been altered. Fusobacterium, a bacterium that normally lives in the microbiome of the mouth and not the colon, has been found in 50% of colon cancers. What's going on there? There's some translocation. We're messing up the microbiome with so many things in the modern diet. Unnecessary antibiotics, which carpet bomb the microbiome and kill some bacteria and other bacteria overgrow, changing that balance. Sometimes the bacteria overgrowing are more pro-inflammatory, increasing general body inflammation. Unnecessary C-sections. When you're in utero, there's no bacteria in the baby's gut. The microbiome is formed from the bacteria in the birth canal that seeds the microbiome in the child. And it's augmented from bacteria from breast milk and kissing and touching and all kinds of things. But that's the normal formation of the microbiome, which takes shape over the initial days, weeks, and 2 years of a child's life. Well, when they're born by C-section, a sterile baby is extracted from a sterile operative field. They don't have the seeding of the bacteria from the vaginal canal. And what may seed the baby's microbiome in a C-section are the bacteria that normally live in the hospital. Those are not good bacteria. And then, the myth that it doesn't matter if a baby is formula fed or breastfed, that's not true. Yeah. I mean, it might make us feel better. Yeah. And look, some women cannot breastfeed. They just cannot produce breast milk. And we shouldn't shame them. But let's be honest with the data. Breastfeeding is better for the microbiome. And then all the ultra-processed foods, pesticides. If the pesticides kill pests, what are they doing to the bacteria in the microbiome?
Yeah.
Seed oils are not natural. These are not naturally occurring things. We need a new name for them because they're chemicals. They're not seed oils. They sound natural. Vegetable oil. I know you've talked about this in the past.
Yeah, canola oil, all the things it's normal. I'm like, that's not normal. You shouldn't eat with those things. Don't heat that oil up.
That's right. Soybean. I mean, this is a subsidized cheap ingredient because of government subsidies. It's heated up, denatured, and then a solvent is added, and it's turned into a chemical. And guess what happens when you have a chemical that does not appear in nature go down the gastrointestinal tract? The gastrointestinal tract has an immune system lining in the wall of the intestine. And it's the front line of defense of things that go into the body. And when it sees things it does not recognize, things that do not appear in nature, be it microplastics or pesticides or ultra-processed foods or seed oils, it's reacting with an inflammatory response. It's fighting a foreign molecule. And it's not an acute, giant inflammatory storm. It is a low-grade inflammatory reaction. It's chronic, and it's always happening, and it creates general body inflammation, and it makes people feel sick. Just try eating whole foods for a week and then have a bowl of Lucky Charms or Fruity Pebbles. You will feel sick. What's going on there is all these chemical additives that have been engineered to make the cereal look pretty or, more addictive. very highly engineered by food scientists. So when you're done eating, you somehow feel a little full, but you also have an increase in your hunger, which is good for selling food, but it's terrible for your body, right? It's messing with your body's immune system. It's messing with your body's satiety cycle. So we're learning a lot about the microbiome. And if I could just add, Steph, one thing that blew me away was a study that came out of the Mayo Clinic that just came out. I put it in the book, Blind Spots. I think everyone should know about this study. They took kids, 14,000 kids, in one county in Minnesota, and they looked at kids who had taken an antibiotic in the first 2 years of life versus children who did not. The kids who took an antibiotic in the first 2 years of life, now remember, antibiotics carpet bomb and alter the microbiome. They had 20% higher rates of obesity, 32% higher rate of attention deficit disorder. Remember that connection between the gut and the brain? 90% higher rate of asthma, and nearly a 300% higher rate of celiac. This is a major signal in the data. And although you can't conclude definitive cause and effect from a methodological standpoint from that study, here's the kicker. The more courses of antibiotics a child took, the greater the risk of each of those things. And oh, by the way, we've noticed empirically, farmers have been telling us that when you give antibiotics to animals, they're fatter. That's why they do it routinely. And the Amish and old Mennonite communities that use antibiotics very sparingly have almost no rates of chronic diseases and lower rates of cancer. So there's a lot we can learn about the microbiome.
That's amazing. What I love about this topic too is like when I was looking through your book, it had so much good information about this antibiotics piece, but then there was also cases where you're like, maybe you do use it. I'll give an example where my son, he was 5 at the time, he had appendicitis and he had to get his appendix out. And I remember as a parent being like, what do I do? Like, okay, he looks very terrible. He does look like he's on the verge of death because it waited way too long. And like they had to take it out. And then in your book, it's like, actually maybe, and maybe not for kids, I don't know, but like antibiotics in those cases might actually be preferred almost all the times versus actually going into a really intense surgery like that. So I like your balance of how you're like, mostly no, like it's probably not, needed for a lot of the things of how it's overprescribed right now. And there might be these edge cases where, instead of just ripping out an organ that we don't even understand, being like, who needs it? Don't need you. Like, no, maybe actually try and keep it. And like, let's see if, we can support it in a different way. So I love the balance in the book.
Well, thanks. And I think that's a really important point. You see that with, say, childbirth. Medicine has engaged in so much over-medicalization of ordinary life, of birth. And it's such an extreme, it's done damage and harm. But the other extreme is also damaging. That is just having a baby delivered in the woods. You can get away with it most of the time, but overall it is more dangerous. There's greater risk. And we don't want people to swing from one extreme to the other. There is a healthy balance. Antibiotics save lives, C-sections save lives. So people need to hit that balance. And that's where I try to give people a nuanced perspective. But, nuance is not well received in modern day society. It doesn't fit the sort of yelling of our social media polarization, but it's important in science.
Yeah. Since you've mentioned C-section a couple of times, I had a C-section with my other two. I had twins. So if someone is a case where it's like, maybe it makes sense to have a C-section. I know many people try and get twins out naturally, but I was like, I don't know. That feels really aggressive to me. What could you do if you're like, I am in this situation and I think it might be, better to do this? Like, is there something you can do as the kids are getting pulled out to, help their microbiome and make sure that they're, more protected than they would be otherwise?
So at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, they have a clinical trial where they actually take vaginal fluid and swab it on a newborn baby that's born by C-section. There are some good probiotics too. It's hard to navigate the probiotic space because there's not good studies. And so most of these expensive probiotics go right through your system. But I encourage people to try different probiotics. Probiotics have been studied in premature babies and found to have a benefit in preventing a condition called necrotizing enterocolitis. So there are things you can do. Breastfeeding, the importance of breastfeeding when possible. People want to once they realize how screwed up our microbiomes are, they want to fix it, right? And the best thing you can do is to then switch to a whole foods diet. Biblical principles It's like medicine is rediscovering these ancient principles of whole foods, clean meats, fasting, meditation, like communities, right? These are basic principles. And just like we have seen with smoking, if you smoke for 30, 40 years and then you stop, you get a tremendous benefit. There is a cumulative effect, but then your risk will go down almost to a non-smoker if you continue to live many years without smoking. So hopefully that's what's happening when people switch to good, healthy foods.
Okay, what do you think about Ozempic and like this GLP-1 craze? I mean, I look around and I feel like so many friends that I know are on that, and then they'll just be like, oh, well, they're peptides and they're not as bad as Ozempic. And so it's just, what do you think about this space of like, what is the future of, this like weight loss craze that's happening right now?
Well, gosh, I'm have mixed feelings on this as a gastrointestinal surgeon. I can tell you that they are mimicking normal body hormones. So we don't want to create hysteria that they're extremely dangerous. On the flip side, we are messing with the body's normal cycle of regulating appetite. And what that may mean is that you end up getting a reduced amount of protein intake and you lose muscle mass, just like you lose excess body fat. Now, losing muscle mass in the short term may not have much of a noticeable impact. You may just see the benefits of losing the excess fat, and that's why we're seeing short-term complications go down, heart disease, renal failure, other complications of obesity. But long-term, we're accelerating frailty because frailty is defined by what we call sarcopenia, or the loss of muscle. And guess what the number one predictor of longevity is?
And not being frail.
It's muscle mass. Yeah, exactly. Bone density and muscle mass. It's musculoskeletal health. So I think, and look, they're expensive and you're on it for life. And unless you change your behavior, you're going to be on it forever. So maybe we need to talk about school lunch programs, not putting every kid on Ozempic who's overweight.
I mean, that is wild thinking about putting kids on this. I think about maybe people who've been in a state for 40, 50 years. I'm like, okay, for those groups of people, is there something that you would think to do? Like I've heard like add testosterone to be able to help with your muscle mass. Like are there things to support people who are on this right now to maybe not lose as much muscle mass?
Well, first of all, I probably shouldn't introduce this idea, but there is a medication in development that will supposedly block the receptors on muscle, so there may be less muscle wasting. Okay. I don't want people to think of a pill to solve every problem out there. The thing you should do is exercise and have a relatively high protein intake. And you feel better when you exercise. You always feel better. There's an endorphin release. Your mood is better. You're more affable and you perform better. And I think those are benefits that we overlook when we're looking at the numbers and physiology of how these drugs work.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to kind of dive into this idea of this like group think that happens in the medical community, at universities. I mean, it happens in many of these spaces that it's hard as a consumer when you hear someone very confident, like the most confident person up on stage. You've got the Faucis and the people who are like, do this. And you're like, okay, I'll do it. Like, where does this group think come from? And like, how can we push people out of it and be more in the space that you're playing in that might not be loved by everyone, but it's like pushing out the truths that you're finding?
Yeah, groupthink does tremendous damage. It's can be known as the herd mentality or the mob mentality. And we should do everything possible to recognize that we're simply conforming to a groupthink and try to be independent and as objective as possible. Because when you are objective, when you stand out for your impeccable objectivity and open-mindedness, you're more affable. You're more successful in your job. People want to be around you. People are more likely to solicit your advice. And the psychologist who probably studied this the most in the world was Dr. Leon Festinger. And I write about him in the book Blind Spots. He actually created this concept and defined it, tested it with students, and then tested it in the real world by embedding himself in a cult. And what he discovered was that the brain likes to just be comfortable and lazy with whatever it believes first. Not because it's more logical or scientific than new information, but simply because it heard it first. The belief will settle in your brain, literally. And subconsciously, you'll be very satisfied with the peace of just having one belief. And if a new idea comes along that threatens that belief, the brain subconsciously will reject or dismiss the new information because it doesn't want conflict. It wants a happy one belief brain. Mm-hmm. And it will actually sometimes reframe. We do this subconsciously, reframe new information to make it fit what we already believe. Mm-hmm. So let's say you smoke and then a study comes out saying smoking's bad. A person will subconsciously think, well, the people in the study are different from me. I use filtered cigarettes. I haven't been smoking as long as them. They'll bend over backwards to reframe new information to make it fit what we already believe. And we all do this all the time with politics and business decisions and relationships, and medical science is no different. Mm-hmm. And so the father of modern medicine implored us to recognize that we all have biases, and that's normal. That's part of the human condition. But to actively recognize those biases and suspend them, being aware of them, actively suspend them as we take in new information so we can be as open-minded and impeccably objective as possible. And he implored scientists to do that, but it's probably a broader lesson for society.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is a space that you play in. So like, how do you work with your subconscious to put your cognitive biases to the side to look at new data without, your history influencing how you're viewing it? Like, is there a process you go through?
Yeah, there is a process. And I'll tell you, even in doing the research on Leon Festinger and the psychology of why we resist new ideas, mm-hmm. I started to recognize this more and more in my own life. I mean, this was during COVID when I was doing some of this research. And COVID was a classic example. Our tendency is to be tribal. I'm with that guy. I'm in this camp. But recognizing we have these biases, the right thing to do is to consider all new information objectively. So my antennas would go up every time there was new information. And I would say, okay, I may have my own instinct on this, but let me recognize that that instinct may be misleading. I'm going to put that aside and try to consider this from the other point of view, that maybe this is new information that challenges what I believe, but is true. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of issues, we saw the society, become very divided and tribal during COVID. And that was sort of an ultimate test. So yes, in our research team now, where we're constantly evaluating new medical studies and trying to understand what's true and what's bad, fake science, mm-hmm. we have to constantly recognize that we have our biases and sort of take the other point of view. If you remember when Obama ran for president the first time, he said, when asked, what's your favorite book? He said, Team of Rivals. Mm-hmm. And I think we forgot about the importance of that principle of surrounding yourself with people who are going to challenge you, who are going to give you a different point of view. And the purpose of science is to challenge deeply held assumptions. It's not to go along with the groupthink. When we do groupthink in medicine, we have a terrible track record. Yeah. Peanut allergy avoidance, the food pyramid, opioids are not addictive. We got that wrong for 30 years. Overuse of antibiotics for 60 years. We still get that wrong, telling people there's no downsides. So we've got to question where there's actually evidence and where we're just listening to the opinion of a small group of medical oligarchs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, I 100% agree. Is there anywhere, like I'm envisioning a public scoreboard that's like decentralized and it goes up there with data showing people like, here's the current research, and it's not just one person who has the message that you listen to. It's like other scientists, doctors are like upvoting, downvoting, and kind of showing like, here is what people think without it being, a groupthink mentality of more of like people able to poke holes in research and showing the public like, this one was wrong, X. This one was also wrong, X. Here's the latest research, and here's like, the pros and cons of it. Like, is there somewhere that people could just look quickly to be like, here's history, here's what I need to look through again. Here's some questions I should ask. Like, I just feel like there's so much information these days. It's pretty hard to keep up with it.
I wish there was something like that because people are flying blind, right? How do you know what to believe? And so a bunch of us now, a group of doctors, are now sort of banding together and educating the public directly. Mark Hyman, Peter Attia, Casey Means, Vinay Prasad. We started a Substack called Sensible Medicine where we critique medical studies. Peter does a great job of that too in his newsletter. We're writing books. We're sort of dividing and conquering. Peter Attia, who's a good friend, helped me a lot with my book Blind Spots in figuring out the topics and what to cover and what would sort of complement what he's been talking about. So there is a group of people now that are saying, we have the most medicated generation in human history. We're getting sicker. We have got to try something different. We're going to go directly to the public and educate them. And it's okay if they hear different opinions. We have this paternalistic culture of medicine that's kind of like, we have to all stay on message. We can't have any dissenters. Well, our track record is very poor. Half of our nation's children have obesity or are overweight. A quarter of them have prediabetes or have fatty liver infiltration. Autism is going up 14% a year each year for the last 23 years. Autoimmune diseases are going up. In my field of pancreatic cancer, rates have doubled in the last 2 decades. Who's asking these big questions? Who's looking at the root causes? Who's talking about food as medicine and pesticides and environmental exposures? Maybe we need to study the environmental exposures that cause cancer, not just the chemo to treat it. So we do have a group of us now talking about the root causes of our chronic disease epidemic.
Okay, well, I'm excited about that. And any support we can give to bring more awareness of that, we're here. It's
Thank
amazing.
you.
All right, so we normally would do a lightning round, but I know we probably wouldn't have a ton of time for that. So I'm going to ask you instead just one thing that you haven't looked into yet that you're like, this still gets to be explored. It could be, something that you think a lot of people still think is healthy, or it's just like a topic that you're like, I haven't looked into this space yet, but there's more work to be done.
Well, I think it's the hormone binding properties of pesticides. There's good literature now that suggests it's activating the estrogen receptors. And so it's no riddle of the Sphinx that the age of puberty is going down each year, that fertility rates are going down, that the average sperm count today is 50% of what it was just half a century ago. So we've got to take a look at that. When we fluoridate our water, our drinking water, which the CDC claims is one of the 10 greatest public health achievements in history on their website, even though Europe doesn't do it, you've got to ask if it's killing the bacteria, the fluoride is killing the bacteria in the mouth, and that's how it reduces cavities. What's it doing to the bacteria in the microbiome? Right? So we have to look at that. Plus, fluoride has been found to build up in the learning center of the brain, and there's a lower IQ found in children in fluoridated areas. So we've got to challenge some of these deeply held assumptions. And it's not that there's not good research out there, it's that people don't know about it. That's why I write this book, Blind Spots. And we've done a terrible thing to doctors in this country. We've said, you're smart, you went to med school, we turned you into a robot by making you memorize all these enzymes and molecules and drugs. Then you come out with this reflex, you're burnout, you're in debt. So put your head down, do your job of billing and coding. We're going to measure you by your throughput, and then you'll be rewarded if you do what we tell you to do. We've done a terrible thing to doctors. Burnout rates are very high. A lot of people are rejecting it, going directly now to patients and employer groups. And we haven't given doctors the time or resources to actually talk about the root causes of all of these diseases that are on the rise in the United States.
Yeah, man. It's a wild world. That's why I love the functional medicine, integrative medicine. I mean, those kind of practitioners. It's hard because they normally aren't under insurance and they're outside that space. But to me, those are the ones who are really looking into the root causes. And usually the first advice is health and what's your diet. And like that's how many things could probably be cured. So, I love your work. I'm so excited about, the space that you're in. Thank you for bringing awareness to all of this. We will for sure link up your book in these show notes, but where else can we send our listeners, our viewers? Where should we send them to find out more about you?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you for linking to the book. I hope people enjoy it. I loved writing it. I'm on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. So I'm trying to put out some health tips and respond to some health news in real time to give people some guidance on their everyday health decisions. and at the same time, give them some hope, because I think doctors are rejecting the current healthcare system and they're starting from scratch. And so it's an exciting time in medicine right now.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Well, thanks so much for being a great guest, and hopefully we'll have you back for a round 2 in the future.
Great. Maybe when I'm in Austin sometime. Great to see you.
Come by.
Steph.
Yeah, you
Okay.
too. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.